Hello and welcome. This is Larry Johnson, and this is Countercurrents. The purpose of Countercurrents is to bring on people who are what I consider courageous, who are in the forefront of some current events, and who have a unique perspective to share, and to try to get into a discussion that allows you to get to know them. And so today, I have Kevork Almassian. Kevork in the past has been kind enough to host me on his podcast. He's based in Germany. He is originally from Syria. He's now an exile of sorts in Germany. And so, Kevork, thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Larry, thank you so much for having me. It is my honor to be on your show, and I would love to have you more often on my show. But I see your busy schedule, and many YouTube channels would like to collaborate with you and have you on your channel. Sometimes I feel like, oh, I'm adding some pressure on Larry, but I would love to have you back on my channel.
So let's get some folks, help folks understand your background. So where were you born? Where did you grow up?
This is a great question that I like to explain, especially to your American audience. A century ago, when the Armenian genocide happened under the Ottoman Empire and then the Young Turk, let's say, government, my ancestors are of an Armenian ethnicity, and we used to live in the current southern Turkey, especially between Kilis and Gaziantep. And they escaped the genocide and the massacres to Aleppo, which is currently in Syria, in northern Syria. So my family, extended family, they found refuge and safe haven, let's say, in Syria, and many of the Syrians protected my ancestors when they escaped there. So I was born and raised in Syria. I was born in 1987, and I studied my elementary, secondary, university, everything in Syria. And I learned English in Syria, actually. And then because of I studied international relations and diplomacy. This was my passion about politics for a long time, especially because I grew up with the stories of the Second Intifada, and then the invasion of Iraq happened, Lebanon invasion. These events always keep something in your conscious, like you want to do something about it later. So I was motivated to get involved in politics to bring some change, not only in the broader political spectrum, but also in Syria, because I'm always interested in political reforms, especially now that they call Syria a dictatorship, right? My university sent me to Paris to study European affairs because I had high GPA grades. From Syria, I went 1 year exchange program to Paris, particularly to Sciences Po. Mm-hmm. And later I started my master's degree in political science, specialized in Middle Eastern affairs in Lebanon. However, I finished all the courses for my master's degree, and I have an 88 GPA out of 100, but I couldn't manage to submit my graduation dissertation, as we say, because the supervisor and all the other supervisors that I offered my work, they refused to put their signature on it in 2012 when the war was still fresh in Syria, because all the narrative was this is a popular revolution against dictator Assad, and anything else is completely, even in academia, it was rejected. Mm-hmm. So my work was rejected, and the supervisor wanted big changes in my dissertation. And I learned the hard way that I have to be a little bit stubborn about these cases, because once you start to compromise, even in academia, then your work will be published in the library, and people will go and use your work as a source later for what happened in Syria. And I refuse to do that, because this is my country, and I stand firm with my convictions, and I believe that what happened in Syria were two different things. One, it was an Islamist insurgency against a secular government. And secondly, it was a covert operation by the CIA and also the Pentagon, who funded these insurgents in Syria, right? Yeah. And I refuse to call it a democratic revolution. This was the conclusion that I reached at the end of my dissertation. And the supervisor refused to put his signature, and I still haven't gotten my master's degree, but I am adamant, and I will continue on my stubbornness until I get to convince the supervisor to accept my conclusions.
Have you published that? Is it published and available for people to read?
No, I will publish it as a book later when it gets submitted, because nowadays I see that my knowledge has expanded also about the Syrian war itself and its interconnection with the Ukraine war. Many people do not see there is a linkage between Syria and Ukraine, for example, and why these wars started simultaneously, because the Ukraine war didn't start in 2022, it started in 2014 after the coup, and the Syrian war was ongoing back then. This was a grand strategy by the US neocons, basically, to kick the Russians out of the waters, and especially from the Black Sea and from the Mediterranean. So by coupping the previous government in Ukraine, the first thing the new government wanted to do is to kick out the Russian fleet from the Crimea. So the Russians went in, they held a referendum, and they captured Crimea because they wanted to keep a foothold in the Black Sea. And historically, many wars have been fought over the Black Sea. And similar case was in the Mediterranean. Assad, the father, and his son, they gave an access for the Russian fleet to come to Tartus, to land there, and they continue their operations, whether it's military or trade. So the Russians saw that they're going to get kicked out of the Mediterranean as well if they don't come for help in Syria. This was one of the reasons. The second reason was because of this jihadist scene that the CIA recreated, let's say, copied the Afghanistan scenario in Syria. The Russians saw that this domino effect will come from Syria to Iraq, and it did. And from Iraq, it will move to Central Asia. So they were very, let's say, on an intelligence level and strategically speaking, they had an invested interest to come to Syria and end this phenomena. And true enough, once they intervened, ISIS started to decrease its power, because ISIS was expanding and they were coming from Palmyra to Damascus. And if you remember John Kerry's leaked audio when in late 2015 he met with so-called Syrian opposition figures in Washington, D.C., and somebody was recording it in secret. And John Kerry said, and I'm paraphrasing him, that we were watching the expansion of ISIS and we thought that's a good idea to let them expand, because this will increase the pressure on Assad and then he will come for a compromise. But instead of compromising, he got Putin on his side. Yeah, now the situation has changed. This is what he said, basically. So this is my understanding, let's say, the linkage between Ukraine and Syria.
Yeah, I think the problem in the West, particularly here in America, is that people look at the events of the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003, and then the so-called, the uprisings throughout the Middle East in 2011, 2012, as disparate, as completely separate, as having nothing to do with each other. And yet the creation of ISIS growing out of the U.S. invasion of Iraq, and then its a migration into Syria, and then the United States turning to use it so cynically is is shocking. How old were you when the let's say the rebellion started?
Yeah, just a quick note, because you mentioned that the emergence of ISIS from Iraq to Syria. This is something we can prove, because the Defense Intelligence Agency of the US in 2012, they have submitted a report to former President Barack Obama, warning him and telling him clearly that the insurgents, the Al-Qaeda insurgents, are the driving force behind this revolution, let's say, quote unquote, against Assad in eastern Syria. And they told him clearly that this wave of this jihadi scene is coming also from Iraq to Syria, and it's going to expand. And they say in this document that many of the Gulf countries see this as a positive development in order to oust Assad. And despite the warnings of the Defense Intelligence Agency of the US, Obama put his signature on Timber Sycamore, which was the covert operation of the CIA in Syria. And they spent $1 billion per year between 2011 to 2018 on these jihadists. And this is only for the covert operations. We're not speaking about the Pentagon's training and the weaponry and other European countries, for example, the Netherlands, the regional countries, Turkey, Qatar, Saudi Arabia. It is over $200 billion operation in Syria, which killed 500,000 people. And all is now blamed on Assad, because if you follow the mainstream, everything is on Assad. Now, your question was where I was when it all started.
How old were you when that all started?
So I was studying my political science in Beirut, but I used to go regularly to Syria during the war to visit my family and also for journalistic work, both to Aleppo, Homs, and to Damascus. I've been to different front lines against ISIS, for example, in Damascus, when they were occupying the Al Yarmouk camp. And I've seen a lot, Larry. And in Syria, when you're there and you see the type of an insurgency is still ongoing against the government, you have no choice but to say, I stand with the government. Because clearly, the people who are carrying out the fight against Assad, whether you agree with Assad or not, are Islamist, Al-Qaeda type insurgents. And if they capture me, they don't have to interrogate me, because once they check your ID, Syrian ID, and they see you're a Christian, you're dead. You don't have a way to negotiate with them and say, no, but maybe I'm with the revolution, please spare my blood. No, there is no way to negotiate with them. In 2012, I will mention this example, an armed group directly financed by the CIA in Aleppo and trained by the CIA in Aleppo, and the leader of this group used to be called Haji Maria. They captured my brother. This was in mid-2012. And he was captured with his girlfriend and in the car. So they took him and her and the car, and they took them to one of the headquarters of these militants. And they called my father. Those are the moderate rebels, right? That Obama used to call them. They said to my father that your son is alive with us. If you want to see your son again, you need to pay $20,000, or we will send the head of your son to your doorstep. So they will slaughter him. And in this incident, when they made a call with my father, I was on a Zoom call with my father at the same time. So he was talking to me on his laptop, and he received a phone call, and he said, "Oh, it's your brother calling." And I said, "Pick up the phone. Let's also have a group chat."
Yeah.
And he picked up the phone, and my brother is speaking Arabic to him. We don't speak Arabic at home because we are Armenians. We speak Armenian at home. I hear him on the the Skype call that he's speaking Arabic, and he says, "Dad, this is a serious situation. I got kidnapped. And the kidnappers are going to speak to you." And my father said, like, "Don't joke with me about such things, don't make jokes."
Yeah.
And right enough, the one of the militants took the phone, and he said, "Your name is this, and your son is with us. And if you want to see him, you have to pay $20,000. And my father said, "Are you crazy? $20,000? I don't have $2,000 cash money at home. But if you want $2,000, we could collect now and we could give it to you. And if you don't like the $2,000, he told him, keep my son with you, feed him, because I already have 4 other sons to feed. And during these times, we don't have we don't have businesses any longer. It's war situation. So you could lift some weight from my shoulder." This is literally what he said. And I was like, what the hell are you telling them? I don't have 3 other brothers or sons. We are only 2 brothers.
Yeah.
And he closed the conversation. And I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Look, if they were going to kill him, they would have killed him already. But they're negotiating, they need money. These people, those are the gangsters. They need money. And if I don't negotiate with them, then we have to pay $20,000. I said, "What if they kill him?" He said, "No, they will call back." And right enough, they called back, like after 30 minutes. And they agreed on a $12,000 and the car. So my father had to go to the headquarters and free my brother. with his girlfriend that we didn't know that he had a girlfriend with him, because the situation would have completely changed if we knew that there was a girl with him. And he went to the headquarters of the militants alone at night, at midnight, with a car. I thought that they will never come back after this, my father and my son, my brother, but we didn't have any other choice but to go to their headquarters. And they let him go after torturing him. My brother was tortured. She was not tortured. And he was called all sorts of names for being a pig, because they called the Christians pigs and this and that. Right. So, yeah, it is traumatic for many people who experienced this. And I'm not saying that the people who were anti-Assad aren't also traumatized, because this was a war. Both sides were fighting each other. But trying to portray it as if there was one side using militant force against ordinary citizens, this is completely false. From day one, the government lost many of its police and its security operatives. And the strategy back then was that we shouldn't tell our people that we're losing soldiers or security operatives, because then they will think that we're weak. It will give the impression that the government is not strong enough. So they hid it for 3 months. What's going on in Syria? The government completely shut down the press. They didn't, they asked the press not to report about the casualties in the government side. But then in June 2011, this was only 3 months after this insurgency, the so-called rebels themselves, they posted a video of them slaughtering 120 Syrian soldiers and security personnel in just a short. This was in Idlib. And this was the case that you can't deny any longer. This was posted on social media, this was documented, and everybody saw it. And even the US ambassador, the UK ambassador back then, they went to this location and they checked themselves what happened there. So, and despite that, they continued supporting the insurgency because they were tasked to topple Assad.
Yeah, and this Western obsession to get rid of Assad was, I've always characterized it, entirely caught up with Syria's role as being seen as friendly to Iran. This ultimately was to try to get rid of, divide, weaken Syria in order to protect Israel. Would you agree with that assessment or not?
I totally agree with you. There are a few things with this. When Assad, the son, came to power, they were celebrating in Washington, in London, in Berlin, in Paris, because Assad, the son, he is progressive compared to his father. Yeah, he studied medicine. He practiced in London, and he met his wife, who was born and raised in London, of a Syrian origin, also there in the UK. So they thought that those are modern couple, progressive, liberal, coming from the West, studied there. I heard that he used to drink some wine when he was in London, the usual things that they try to persuade the leader. Oh, you're a reformer. You're coming to bring democracy to Syria. We will include you into the international community, this and that. But this has taken only 2 years. Like between 2001 and 2003, then the invasion of Iraq happened. And Assad knew that this is not about Saddam Hussein. This was about destroying a big civilization, and this will reflect negatively on Syria. So he took a decision to fight against this occupation. And this was the time when Syria started encouraging the resistance, let's say, in Iraq. And this is very important, Larry. People always say that, but Assad encouraged the terrorists to go to Iraq. I will mention this very clearly. The Syrians were supporting the resistance against the US. The US intelligence apparatus, they were supporting the radical elements in this so-called resistance, especially the Al-Qaeda types people, in order to break the resistance and in order to cause sectarian divisions in the Iraqi society. This was a state policy of the US to encourage these Al-Qaeda type people in Iraq to attack the Shias, for example, to attack the minorities, to loot the artifacts of Iraq, etc., etc. Similarly, it happened in Syria. Now here, the Secretary of State of the US came back then, Colin Powell, to Damascus, and he said, look, You have to follow our dictates. We are victorious now in Iraq, and we have demands from Damascus. You either submit to the demands or else. And what were the demands? They didn't ask for democratic change, parliamentary elections, LGBTQ rights, all this stuff.
Yeah,
no.
you're right.
they ask Assad to cut his strategic relationship with Iran, like you mentioned, and most importantly, to close all the offices of Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, and stop giving them tangible support. So Assad rejected it, and Bush administration considered him a part of the axis of evil, so imposed sanctions on him. But this is my conspiracy theory. We could discuss about it. Probably in the future, everything would be clear, because things can be seen as a conspiracy theory now, but in a year, 2, 3, or a decade, everything would be seen as just a reality. I think that also when Assad rejected this deal with the US, they decided to kick the Syrian forces out of Lebanon. For context, when the civil war in Lebanon erupted, I think this was in 78, the Arab League authorized the Syrian army to go to Lebanon and end the civil war. So Syrian army was stationed in Lebanon, and they had to finish or end the civil war. And above that, because Israel invaded Lebanon, they had their battles against Israel there. But once they were there, the Syrian, let's say, decision makers, they realized that because of their air defense systems that they are now installed in Lebanon in the Bekaa level, in the Bekaa, they're able to deter Israeli attacks on Syria. So they can also fight the Israelis on Lebanese territory instead of fighting them on their territory. So they created this buffer zone between Israel and Syria in Lebanon. Now, the Americans know this. And in 2003, this is just in my opinion, they wanted to kick the Syrians out of Lebanon. How could they do that? How could they kick the Syrians out of Lebanon? By sectarian tensions. So what happened basically in 2005 on February 14th, on the Valentine's Day, there was a mysterious assassination of the former prime minister of Lebanon, Rafiq al-Hariri.
Right.
And Rafiq al-Hariri was very, he was loved by many Lebanese, and especially by the Sunni Lebanese. And 3 minutes later, the US was already accusing Syria of killing him. And all their allies in Lebanon, they accused Syria of assassinating him. Although one of the Al-Qaeda affiliates, they said that we killed him and we assassinated him, but they rejected the confessions of this Islamist group. And they said, no, it was Assad who assassinated Rafiq al-Hariri. And they created what is called the Cedar Revolution. It's a color revolution again, but they needed the trigger. And this was a trigger for the Syria revolution, and the only title for this Syria revolution was Syria Out. So the Syrians had immense pressure there, and they didn't want to have a fight with the Lebanese people, so they started to withdraw. But during this withdrawal, they left all the heavy artilleries, the tanks, and the ammunition in the hands of Hezbollah. Because they knew once they withdraw from Lebanon, Israel is going to invade Lebanon, because Israel saw Syria as an obstacle to occupy Lebanon. And once Syria withdrew in 2005 from Lebanon, in 2006, Israel invaded Lebanon in July 2006. But then Assad came and gave huge support to Hezbollah, opened all the warehouses of the Syrian army to Hezbollah, sent its advisors to southern Lebanon to give guidance to Hezbollah how to fight against the Israelis. And the Hezbollah managed to defeat the Israelis and kick them out. And this was something that the Americans would never, they couldn't forget about it among the neocons, especially Condoleezza Rice, who said, the war in Lebanon is the birth pound or the birth pang of the new Middle East.
Yeah,
they wanted to create Yes, exactly. They wanted to create a new Middle East. So they didn't forget what Assad did here. However, it was Sarkozy who told the Americans, give him a last chance. Give Assad the last chance. We want to persuade him to come to our side. We want him to be on the side of the international community, make peace with Israel, and come to the camp of the Arabic countries who are normalizing relations with Israel. So Sarkozy invited Assad in 2007 to the National French Unity Day, and he gave him a red carpet treatment. And Assad stood among the world leaders on a big stage, among all the leaders that you can remember back then. And this was the moment when this was the plot. Assad didn't know about it. They wanted him to shake hands with Ehud Olmert on stage. And there is a famous video about this. If for those who are looking for this video, you can type on YouTube, cat and mouse, Bashar al-Assad and Ehud Olmert. And you will see this video on Euronews when the French foreign minister is talking to Assad and telling him that Ehud Olmert is in his back on the stage and he wants to shake hands with him. And Assad is saying, that's impossible. I'm not going to shake hands with him. Ban Ki-moon comes and talks to him and it says like, we have to open a new page, you have to shake hands with Ehud Olmert, and Assad says no. So Assad starts moving and escaping or going a little bit further from Ehud Olmert, and the former emir of Qatar back then comes to Assad and he says like, come walk with me, I save you. Like he wants to save him from this pressure. But this was another plot because the Emir of Qatar took him and he started walking with him to the opposite direction. And once they were passing Ehud Olmert, the Emir of Qatar turns his back and he walks back from where they came from and he leaves Assad alone with Ehud Olmert, like very close. So Assad again continues walking alone and he turns his back to Ehud Olmert and he never shakes hands with him. And this was when the French, the British, and everyone understood that he's not going to normalize with Israel, he's not going to shake hands with Ehud Olmert, because in Syria they say shaking hands with the Israeli means recognition of Israel, and in Syria they don't recognize the political the legitimacy of the political entity of Israel. They say that Israel is an occupation force, it's a colonial force, and the Jews are completely welcomed in historic Palestine, and they can live alongside each other. Although the official policy is two-state solution, but I don't think that the Syrians believed in a two-state solution for the Arab-Israeli conflict. Well, this is why they wanted him out.
Yeah, I mean, it really, it has all to do with Israel. I mean, Israel is really at the center of this and the driving force. The British intelligence services, as I recall, were also equally active, if not playing even a more dominant role than the CIA in the Syrian involvement. Because I remember with the Benghazi incident, you had David Petraeus, the then CIA director. He arrived in Turkey on September 4th, the week before. And I reconstructed that I believe the reason he went there was to tell the Turks, hey, we're going to have to suspend the military aid coming out of Libya until we're through this election cycle, because they were concerned about the conflict affecting Obama's re-election campaign. Then it's a week later, September 10th, that Chris Stevens, the ambassador, goes to Benghazi and he meets with a Turkish diplomat. So that CIA facility there in Benghazi was to process weapons that were being collected in Libya and then rounded up in Libya and then sent forward to Turkey, that were then being smuggled into or given to these Syrian rebels. And again, but the reason, the entire motive behind this was to weaken Syria and protect Israel.
Yes. Lara, we just want to, we don't usually give so much credit for the Brits. You're so correct on this. They have embedded themselves big time in manufacturing stories in Syria. One example is the White Helmets. Many people do not know that the White Helmets organization, which even they have a documentary on Netflix if you want to watch the documentary, and I encourage people to watch both sides, and they will realize that this is a completely the opposite of the reality of the White Helmets. They don't mention who is the person behind the White Helmets. He's a former MI6 officer. He was in Bosnia recruiting Mujahideen back then against Milosevic. And then he retired. And all these people, when they retire, I don't know if they really retire. And
I'm accused of that as well. So
and he established this quote-unquote humanitarian organization in Syria called the White Helmets, with the most fancy GoPro cameras all the time, and sending footage to the world with 4K footage when Syrians do not even have an internet and electricity in the country. And they're the ones who have the satellite. The internet is 24/7, electricity is 24/7, and they're broadcasting live to the world. And remember what happened after 2013 when this organization was created, and the chemical attacks started to occur.
Sarin gas, it was all a fabrication, In
Ghouta, in Khan Sheikhun, in Douma, this is the clearest example that the White Helmets, they have manufactured a theater for an alleged chemical attack scene, which never happened. And there were no victims of a chemical attack. And they even posted a photo of the cylinder, alleged cylinder, which supposedly fell from a Syrian helicopter. And the cylinder, when it falls, it has this the trigger of the cylinder, which should the gas come from it, right? So they even misplaced the cylinder, and this trigger was on the top of the cylinder. So if this was a real scenario and the cylinder fell, then the gas should go up and cannot go down. And in this case, they realized their mistake and deleted the photo and changed the cylinder and posted the second photo. And this time the trigger is on the bottom side of the cylinder, basically, which is on the rooftop. The second photo they published, a cylinder. I have never seen in my life that I live in the 4th floor, by the way. If you drop a cylinder from a helicopter and the cylinder penetrates the ceiling, it cannot really sleep on my bed like it's a baby. No, it will break my bed. And this cylinder is just sleeping on the bed, you know? And everybody knows that these were fabrications in Syria and provocations to trigger foreign intervention in the country. Unfortunately, many people still believe that these chemical attacks either happened or the government used this sarin or chlorine gas. I will give them a hint. I will give them something about this to think about it, because Seymour Hersh did a brilliant investigation about the first or the second chemical attack which happened. Sarin gas being used. This was in August 15th, I believe, in Ghouta.
Right.
Larry, I will just give you a context and you tell me if it makes any sense. So this is happening in August 2013. And in March 2013, a chlorine gas were used on Syrian army position in Aleppo. So the Syrian government said, we were attacked by a chlorine gas, and we want for the UN to send their expert teams to come to Syria to investigate whether a chemical attack happened, and two, who did it, right? And it took them 6 months to send teams to Syria. Why? Because the Americans and the Brits, they were always finding an obstacle not to send teams to Syria to investigate what happened. They want for the time to pass, for the traces also to disappear. And finally, they accepted it, but only to determine if a chemical attack happened and not who did it. And they arrived to Syria, to Damascus, on the day before the second attack in Ghouta, which killed 1,200 people. So they arrived to Damascus, they go to the government buildings to get the licenses and also check on the security, because they need security to go to this chemical attack scene in Aleppo, and they get all the permissions. So they come back to the hotel, and the second day they have to go to Aleppo, right? Which is 400 kilometers to the north of Damascus. They go to their hotels and they go to sleep. And the same night, a chemical attack happens in Ghouta. And they accuse Assad of using a sarin gas there. I mean,
Right.
You don't need to be an expert to understand that somebody wanted to abort this UN mission to go to Aleppo and see if a chemical attack happened against government forces. And fair enough, it has been aborted. The UN experts didn't go to Aleppo. The mission has been aborted, and Obama threatened Syria with invasion and bombing the country. Everything went into mess.
Yeah.
And during this time, the British intelligence, like you mentioned, they had assets in Eastern Ghouta, and they sent a report to Obama administration telling him that this sarin gas is not from the stockpile of the Syrian government, because they have their own codes. Every gas components, they have their codes, and it doesn't match the Syrian army chemical stockpile. So Obama backed one step back. He took one step back and he said, "Now I want the approval of the Congress," because he wanted to bomb Syria. But then he changed his mind. He said, "I want now the approval of the Congress." Why? Because the Brits showed him clearly that in their clinical trials and the tests on the attack, that this was a sarin component, but it wasn't from the stockpile of Syria, but rather this came from Turkey. So who gave this sarin? Is it from the Libyan stockpile? Is it from Saudi Arabia? Is it from... We don't know who supplied them with this sarin gas, but it came from Turkey. This is what we know. But until this moment, this issue is still raised on social media platforms and said, like, attributed, and they say this is, yeah, because look, if you portray Assad as he's a butcher, he's a psychopath, he's someone who is unstable, and he wakes up in the morning deciding to kill his own people, so he's unreasonable, irrational, and you don't show his interviews to the public, people would think that he's some crazy nut job, you know, and he would do something like this. But if you show your people Assad's interviews and you see that the guy is completely stable and he's even ahead of his time compared to the American officials and the European officials, and he speaks fluent English and he understands geopolitics, technology, social affairs and everything, you would say, no, this guy is not a nut job to call the UN experts to come to Syria and wait them to go to their hotels and then gas his own people when the UN experts are there.
Well, actually, let me give you some additional perspectives on this. So back then I was still holding top secret clearances. I was still involved directly working with U.S. military special ops in terms of scripting exercises. And we were actually, I was down at Fort Bragg working on an exercise when all of this was unfolding. And I remember saying, you know, when the report came out about the chemical attack, this gas attack, I went back through the preceding 6 days of every morning, the Defense Intelligence Agency produces a classified briefing for both the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And they have one that's top secret and one that's secret. So I was looking at both of them. There was not a word, nothing about Syria, nothing. I mean, you know, and why is that unusual? Well, U.S. intelligence had been, along with the Israelis, monitoring the Syrian military units that do the chemical weapons attacks, because Syrian chemical weapons they're called, they're a binary, which means they are inert when they're kept apart, but when you combine them, then they become an active agent that can kill. But once you mix them, you got about 36 hours. So in other words, you would see activity among the Syrian military unit with that responsibility, and there was no activity, nothing reported. And so there was none of what you would expect to be intel reporting about this incident. And that's when I realized this was a setup. This was staged. Yeah. This was theater. It was not real.
Yeah, it was aimed at the stripping Syria of its chemical weapons, and I'm not a proponent of having chemical weapons, and I think it's already outdated. But
Yeah.
in the 70s, when Israel developed its nuclear program, Syria didn't have the capacity to develop a nuclear program, so they developed their chemical program as a deterrent measures against Israel, which occupies the Golan Heights up until this moment. So this was the moment when Syria had to give up its chemical stockpile, and this was a compromise that Russia initiated between the US and Syria, and otherwise the US would have bombed all the what they call the vital strategic regime positions. So they would have basically destroyed the major military capacity of the Syrian army and allowed the rebels to occupy Damascus, just like they did with Libya, right?
Yeah,
so this was something that the Russians mediated and they stopped it. And the second thing with these chemical attacks, it also gives you can use it as a justification for whatever you're doing in Syria, covert, non-covert, supplying arms, because you have to help these helpless Syrian people fight against the tyrant Assad, right? It has been used in multiple ways against Syria. And now, remember, after Syria gave up its chemical stockpile, Israel bombed Syria over 1,000 times.
Yes.
Before that, they didn't dare to bomb Syria just like regularly, like they do now. Syria lost its deterrence capacity, and I don't think that there is really an effective way to deter the Israeli and the Americans in the region unless you have a type of a weapon that can cause like a serious damage to them. And this is Syria doesn't have at the moment. So Syria is exposed to this type of attacks. However, Syria changed its strategy, and now they are increasingly giving more sophisticated weaponry to Hezbollah, for example, and Hezbollah is carrying out these attacks against the Israeli positions there. Syria is not out of the scene. It's not out of the equation. Syria is present in this current ongoing conflict in the Middle East. They don't want to participate in it directly, and because the economy is exhausted, the people are not ready for another war after 13 years of already big wars and earthquake and everything. The mood is not in favor of going into war. But at the same time, the routes between Syria and Lebanon for sending armaments, because Syria doesn't send, let's say, a tank or sends artilleries, or no, they send the components. And Hezbollah trains in Syria how to assemble it. They learn, they get the knowledge and everything, and they assemble them in southern Lebanon, and they use them against Israel, and then they share the knowledge with the Lebanese militant factions. This is how Syria, by extension, supports the Palestinians in Gaza or in other places in Palestine. But unfortunately, nowadays, the narrative about Syria has been so imposed, let's say, by the mainstream media, that people cannot really make these connections between what's happening in Palestine and what happened in Syria, and what happened in Syria with Iraq. People cannot really connect the dots. You have to really explain very in length. Because, Larry, nowadays, if you turn on your TV, I'm sure you don't even turn on your TV, but if you do,
rarely.
Yeah, it's like in any, please, any news outlet, if you turn on, you have 30 minutes to explain your thought. Like, they invite me to major, let's say, TV outlets, and I have 3 minutes to say something about it. How can I say in 3 minutes? Like, we are speaking now 41 minutes. And we can still speak 41 hours and this won't be over, right? It's like, how can I explain my thoughts like that? Because this is what they did about Syria. But with the Gaza war, the onslaught against Gaza, this is, in my opinion, this is the trigger. This is the turning point. This was something that the people were like, wow, there's something going on there. Like, on TV, I can't see it, but sorry, on my mobile, it's like, it's there, like, you can't really hide. If you have TikTok, if you have Instagram, if you have X, and if you are watching one of these videos, it's impossible not to see what's happening there. So you turn on your TV, they're not reporting about it, and you start to, there's something doubtful. So if they're lying about Gaza, have they lied about Syria? Have they lied about Iraq? Have they lied about Libya? Many of the younger generation, they believe now that the establishment lied about these wars. Therefore, it is now also an opportunity for me and for people like me to present what we believe is the truth of the situation in Syria. And I don't claim that I own the entire truth. What I say is you have the opportunity to learn about Syria from the mainstream, learn about it, and listen to my perspective, and then you make up your mind. Maybe the truth is in the middle. I don't know. But what I'm telling you is just from my subjective opinion, and as someone coming from Syria, and I believe what is right for the Syrian people. Because remember, Larry, also some people do not know what is in the best interest of the Syrian people, because they're not Syrians. They don't live in Syria. And they listen, for example, a segment of Assad saying something negative about gay marriage. And they're like, oh my God, me as a progressive left wing, I can't be with Assad because he says something bad about the gay marriage, right? But you have to remember, this is Syria. You're not talking about California.
Yeah,
you're talking about Syria. You have to talk as a leader of a country. You have to represent the opinion of the majority of the people in your country. You can't really come and tell your people, shock them, 90% probably of them, and say, I'm going to legalize tomorrow gay marriage. They will remove you from power. Because you have to, but the leaders in the West, they have forgotten this. They have forgotten that they represent the interests of the people. They represent nowadays the interests of the corporations, the donors, the bankers, the military-industrial complex, etc., etc. But they don't represent the interests of their own people. So the people in the West probably think that the job of the politician is not what Assad is doing, or probably what their own politicians are doing, which is completely false. The leaders like Putin, like Assad, like Xi Jinping, I criticized Assad a lot during the war for his more, let's say, conservative leaning and trying to make peace with some of the Islamist elements, let's say, in the society, because he wants to avoid further conflict with them, right? And I criticized it. And I wanted for the Islamists to be completely cut from the political scene in Syria.
Kept out.
He knows better, probably. He knows better. I don't know. But at the same time, I also believe that he had the chance to flee. In 2011 and 12, every major country told him, just go and live your life abroad. Go to Russia, go to Iran, go to Qatar, and we will give you millions and millions of dollars. Just go and live the scene, just live your life. You have two sons, a daughter, a beautiful wife. You can become a think tanker. You can become everything you want. Just leave the country, And he decided to fight back. Although a month or two ago, they killed Gaddafi. So there is a track record of killing leaders like Saddam, like Gaddafi. He could have been killed, but he decided to stay. And I respect that. If he didn't stay and he left the country, I would have called him a traitor. Literally. If he left the country for the nut jobs of ISIS, Nusra, and the rest, I would have called him a traitor. This is how I see Assad. I don't have a bread in it. I don't live in Syria. I'm not looking for a government position, etc., etc. If the name of the president was anything else, if it was Larry, I would have supported his effort to abort this mission of this project in Syria.
So when did you leave Syria, and when? Actually, when and why?
Yeah, this was in October 2015. Half the city of Aleppo was occupied by al-Nusra, which is the offshoot of Al-Qaeda in Syria.
Right.
They imposed a siege, which is, I'm sure that it is not reported in the mainstream. They imposed a siege on the rest of the city. They banned bread, meat, milk, baby products, everything, basically. And they starved the people. And there was no way, I never thought that Aleppo would be liberated again. And sometimes such thoughts come, you get a little bit defeatist. You say, what's happening? It's been 6 years and the rebels have been occupying for 4 years. They killed 14,000 civilians with their rockets. What's the end? You don't see that there is a major effort to liberate Aleppo. So I had to leave to get safety for myself first, because I was politically active as well, and also for my family, because I started to bring troubles also to my family. And if something happens to my family, I prefer to kill myself, really. If I'm the reason for any harm for my family, I wouldn't forgive myself, So we left. I came to Germany, and I learned German here, and I found a job here in Berlin, and I started my YouTube channel because although I live in Germany and it's supposed to be more democratic than in Syria, I cannot find a job here with my political opinions. And I applied for a scholarship. And this is one day I'm going to mention all this information in public when I feel myself safe here in Germany. I applied for a scholarship, and first I was accepted, and then they took the scholarship again from me because they found out what is my political opinion about. So you may not be imprisoned here for having an opinion, but they will send you to economic prison, basically. You cannot really make a living. So I decided to start my own YouTube channel and tell the people what's happening in my country from my perspective. I started posting videos, and all of a sudden tens of thousands watching the video. It's like a surprise for me because people were craving what's happening in Syria. It's still 2017, you know? And so the German press saw somebody is speaking about the Syrian case, and he's telling the other side of the story, and he's telling the people in Germany that the refugee crisis happened because of the CIA covert operations creating mayhem and people fleeing the country. So he's blaming the US for the refugee crisis. Oh, no. This is not going to happen.
Well, in fact, didn't some of the German media almost accused you of being some sort of covert Nazi? That you were some right-wing extremist. So I was going, good Lord.
Yeah. Look, we have been speaking now for 50 minutes, and I don't know if the people can judge and say and evaluate if I was saying anything close to right-wing, you know, like I'm not a right-wing person. Nowadays, I see myself more aligned to left populist parties, like, for example, George Galloway's party, right? Like, I see myself more in a political foreign policy approach with them. I'm not a right-wing person, but I have done a job as a camera, let's say, guy behind the camera. I was recording videos for a right-wing politician, right, in the German parliament. But that doesn't mean that if I'm doing a camera job for a right-wing politician, that I'm a right-wing myself. Everybody is a unique person. And and this guy, he's like against the war in Syria, against the war now, the proxy war against Russia, for example. And I agree with him on these cases. I disagree with him on Israel, and I keep telling him about Israel and sending him content about Israel, telling him about the truth, what's happening there. I totally disagree with him on the Palestinian case, for example. But what he says is what he says. And it's not on me if I'm recording a video for someone and giving him the material and saying it, you can post it on your social media.
Right.
I'm doing a job. And at the end of the day, Larry, we all have to make a living. People need to understand that when I post on YouTube, I'm not making thousands of dollars per month to afford my living. I have a wife, I have a family. So I did a camera job for a politician from the AfD, the right-wing party. And accordingly, the media picked me up and said, oh, look, he's not only supporting Assad, because they consider this talking point support of Assad, he's also working for a politician who is from the right-wing party. So there has to be conspiracy in this, you know, it's this interesting story. So who sent you? They interviewed me for 1.5 hours, like it was an interrogation. Like, this is not the job of a journalist. Like, they were sent by the Secret Service to interrogate me for 1.5 hours. So who sent you? Like, what do you mean by who sent me? I came alone. Nobody sent me. I came to Germany with $1,000 in my hand. And I recreated myself here. I did lots of efforts. I learned the language. I integrated into the society. I found friends, connections. I came to a country I know no one. I probably know 3-4 people, you know, in this country. And because of this, I was accused of being a spy. And because of these media campaigns against me, the government decided that I don't deserve to stay in Germany. So they want to take away my resident permit. So they took away my resident permit, basically. So I took them to court. And I said, no, I work 2 jobs. One is this camera work, and second is my YouTube work, and I pay 2 taxes to you. 2, I learned the German language, which is a requirement. I have the highest certificate. And 3, I'm integrated into the German society. So you cannot really deport me legally. And they, despite that, they rejected my case and they took away my resident permit. But during this time, during the process of this court and everything, sometimes things happen in my life, Larry. I always reminded that God exists, because every time a window closes to my face, another door opens. And during this time, when I was in a really big trouble, struggling in a court, etc., I met my wife. And after a year, we got married and we did the wedding here. So because I'm married to a German, they couldn't deport me from Germany. Yeah. Other than that, I would have been now kicked out of the country for having an opinion. Mm-hmm. So it really bothers me to, I'm not a radical person. I'm not saying something really out of extraordinary, I'm just really speaking logic and connecting the dots. But this is more dangerous to them, because if you are someone just yelling and shouting and just, making no sense, this is not dangerous for them. If you're really convincing, you are telling a story to a German person and convincing him, this is dangerous.
Yeah.
This is dangerous for the narrative.
Yeah, and we're seeing that across the so-called enlightened Western countries. I mean, in the United States, you're not old enough necessarily to remember the old days of the Cold War, but back during the even in the last days with Brezhnev, there was this repression in the Soviet Union of speech and the declaration of people as an enemy of the state.
Yes.
And now I've lived long enough to watch a complete reversal where you have greater freedom of speech in Russia today than you do in places like Germany, like England, like the United States. As long as unless you stay within certain topics, if you stray outside of those and do like what you've done, you become a target of attack. So let me ask you, because we're going to run out of time here. That when we have good conversations, time flies quickly.
True.
Is there a hope for the end of the war in Syria as a consequence of what's going to happen in Ukraine and what's happening right now in Israel?
There are two factors that are detrimental for the outcome of the Syrian conflict. One, the conflict in Ukraine. So a few days before, I think this was 2 days before the Russian offensive on Ukraine, Shoigu, back then he was the defense minister, he was in Damascus. And he spoke to Assad. And my sources say that the Russians told Assad basically that you represent the front line against US hegemony in the Middle East. And we want you to hold your guns, and you hold your guns and you hold your line. Now it's not the time to go to Idlib or go to other places. We have to keep our achievements. Like, we have to preserve the achievements that we achieved in the past decade. So hold your line. And we will see about what's happening in Ukraine. It's a strategic conflict, what's going on there. And if the US, let's say, or if Russians emerge victorious from the Ukraine war, this will reflect positively on Syria, because the Americans have to see where is their priority. And the priority is not in Syria. Their priority is in Far East Asia, the Pacific. It's in Russia. So they have to diversify their priorities back then. And also, the Americans do not have a long-run strategy in Syria. Their stay is also connected to their stay in Iraq, and the Iraqi parliament is asking them to leave. And if they leave Iraq, they cannot stay in Syria, because they will become like an island. There is no logistical hub. There is no supply lines. There is nothing. Right. So the Syrians know that during time, a year, 2 or 3, the Americans are going to withdraw. And then they have to deal with the Kurdish separatists, let's say there. And I don't think there is going to be a war against the Kurdish separatists. I think the best solution is to find a middle ground with the Kurds, to give them their what cultural rights they want. If they want to speak Kurdish in their schools, in their curriculum, in their government official buildings, etc., that's fine. But separatism is not going to be tolerated in Syria. And this is coming from someone. I'm not an Arab. I'm an ethnic Armenian. I was born and raised in Syria. I cannot become a president of Syria because the constitution says the president has to be Muslim. I don't have an aspiration to become a president anyway. Yeah. But separatism is not tolerated, even for me. I don't think that 100 or 120,000 Armenians living in one area can come and say, oh, we want to separate from Syria and we're going to take 50% of the oil fields with us for 10% of the population. Like the Kurds have 10% of the population occupying 1/3 of Syria and occupying 50% of the oil fields. That's not going to happen. So the decision of the Syrian outcome is going to be interconnected with Ukraine. Yesterday or the day before, Shoigu was again in Damascus with his military outfit, unlike his visit to North Korea, where he was with his civil outfit. I don't know if that has any connotations, probably. And also the conflict with Israel. Because Syria played smart during the conflict. Syria needed its allies. But Syria didn't want to put all its eggs in the Iranian basket or all its eggs in the Russian basket. So they diversified it, right? So now Syria is trying to balance between these different conflicts. Now Iran is leading this, what they call the axis of resistance against Israel, which Syria is part of it. And at the same time, Syria is part of a broader alliance, a strategic alliance with Russia, and the broader, let's say, global conflict against the United States. So Syria's political peace and stability is linked to these conflicts. But on the ground, if you go to Syria now and go to Damascus, Homs, Aleppo, Latakia, Tartus, all the areas under the control of the government, if Israel doesn't decide to arbitrarily bomb one of the neighborhoods that you were residing, nothing is going to happen to you. You are safe to walk in the streets, and you will enjoy life more than probably in the US. Believe me, Larry, if you go to Syria with all the hospitality, great food, and the people just enjoying their life, people live to have fun. You know, it's like completely different psychology in Syria. So I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that the war will come to an end. It needs the reconciliation with Turkey, which is ongoing with mediation of Russia and Iraq, and the opening of the Arabic countries to Syria will also help. So also let's see who's going to become the next president of the US. If it's Trump, maybe under Trump, if he has better communication with Russia, this could be solved quicker. But Biden didn't do much, let's say, in the past 4 years for Syria. He was just ignoring the file. Nobody is speaking about Syria in the administration at the moment.
Yeah, Kevork, I wish I could give you a better, more optimistic outlook from the standpoint of the United States, but we are caught in I call it an ideological prison. And the nature of this prison is we are incapable of seeing China and Russia as friends. They're viewed as enemies and intractable enemies. Syria is also in that category. That there's no middle ground, and I fear there'll be a big conflagration. It's going to take something to happen to the United States to get us to change. And I mean, it's something of a tragic nature. And I'm not looking for that, but right now, the voice, when I speak out and talk about, we can't deal with Russia as an enemy, I'm accused of being a puppet of Putin, a Russian agent, and my point is there's no basis for dialogue. We can't sit down and talk it out.
Because it's a zero-sum game usually, and you're very correct on this. I believe, really, I believe in this. I met with many people from this U.S. think tanks in Beirut, in other places, in Geneva, in Germany. And I always wonder, like, they keep accusing us of being ideologues in the Middle East, and you see how they speak, the arrogance, we know better than you, what is best for you, and they are really the ideologues, because it doesn't make sense now. Why they want to give long-range missiles to Ukraine and operate it by NATO operatives against Russia? Realistically speaking, they have to give Ukraine Ukraine thousands of these missiles, right, to strike inside Russia if they want to reach to the outcome, and that is Ukraine has to win this war.
Right.
And are they able to sustain the production of these missiles all the time and give it to?
No,
so
not at all.
Logically speaking, what are they doing? They're just prolonging the war with also increasing the chances for nuclear exchange. So logically, strategically, rationally, it doesn't make sense, which means there is ideology is at play, or some people say there are groups over groups intervening and pushing the US into war with Russia. And this is going to change the face of humanity. So why not talk? When me and you, we have thousands of kilometers between us. I was born in Syria, you were born in the US. We have completely different upbringings, but then we can find mutual ground between us.
Yeah.
Why can't the politicians do that? This is their job. Nowadays, you listen to Annalena Baerbock, the foreign minister of Germany, and you wonder, it's like, are you the foreign minister or are you the war minister?
Yeah.
What happened to diplomacy? Where are the diplomats? Why aren't they talking? What happened to Joe is better than war? Where is the diplomacy from this conflict? That's why you were accused of being a Russian asset and being accused of being a Syrian spy in Germany. Baseless accusations, because we're saying, guys, we can coexist.
Talk.
We want for the Americans to have a good relationship with us. In the contrary, I would love to come one day to the US. I would love to meet my American friends. I would love for the Americans to come to my country. We don't hate the American people. We hate the policies of these countries.
Yeah.
So if it changes, everything would go back to normal.
Well, and that's why I do this channel, Countercurrents, to promote this kind of dialogue, this kind of discussion. And so what we've established today is that we're going to have to do this again, because there's a lot more I want to talk to you about. But I thank you for your time today. And those of you who've taken time to watch the conversation with Kevork, please hit the subscribe button and the like button. And I am Larry Johnson. This is Countercurrents, and thank you for watching.